Hi, and welcome to Classics You Slept Through, the podcast where we take some intimidation out of classic literature that you've never read. Hopefully we'll turn you on to some literature. I'm Kyle Davis, and along with my co-host Meredith,
hey,
we are going to be discussing Call the Wild, chapters 1 through 4. So if you have not read it yet, or have not listened, why don't you stop this podcast, pick up the book, go read it, or just drop back an episode in your feed, and you can listen to us read it to you.
Tell them where they can find the book, Kyle.
They can find the book on Project Gutenberg. It is royalty-free in the public domain. Links are in the show notes.
Nice.
So, Mare, we're talking about Call the Wild. Mm-hmm. This is a book. Did you know this book is about a dog?
You know I knew it was about a dog.
I did not know this was about a dog. Not just that it's about a dog, but that the dog is the protagonist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a protagonist and possibly the narrator, or at least that's whose mind we mostly get into.
Oh, is this going to be?
It's more like an omniscient narrator.
Oh, I was going to say, we're getting some literary terms here. This is like third person, because Buck's not talking, right?
No, he's not.
Second person.
Although you do get his thoughts sometimes. Like moments where he goes, so that's how you do it. Okay.
I must have missed that. So we'll hopefully we'll hit those as we come along. So we're starting off in chapter 1. We meet Buck, said protagonist, and he's a California dog. He's living in Central California in the Santa Clara Valley. Actually not too far from where I used to live in Monterey, California. Absolutely beautiful area.
And he's living the life. Like, really living the life on a beautiful farm in some cases. Sometimes it's called a plantation, but
this is the late 1800s, early 1900s. So California. So I don't know. Is that our first problematic reference?
Well, it's like it's like 1897. So it's California. So it's not, it's not no Georgia plantation or anything like that.
Maybe not as bad as it could be, but
they do have hired hands.
As we'll see, maybe the hired hands aren't living so well.
Mm-hmm.
So Buck is sort of the alpha dog on this plantation farm, the judge's place, as he calls it. And unfortunately, some tragedy befalls Buck as he is stolen and quickly moved up to the frozen north of Canada.
And why is he stolen?
He is stolen because the wages of a gardener's assistant do not lap with the needs of a wife and progeny, or something along those lines.
You'll hear that phrase over and over. Manuel, he doesn't make enough money. And he's got a gambling problem, probably because he doesn't make enough money. So he's trying to make ends meet, trying to feed his family. He can't. And so he resorts to, I should say, stealing Buck to sell him to people who are, mining? Prospecting? Looking for gold. Up in the Klondike, up in Canada.
Well, Buck is not sold. Well, Buck is sold into a system that is churning a need for dogs. So, as we sort of alluded to with the wages don't lap, Jack London likes to, when he finds a phrase he likes, he definitely sticks with it. I think in the first 2 or 3 chapters alone, we're going to hear that Manuel's wages don't lap, as he says. So the guy doesn't make enough money. He's going to use that exact turn of phrase a few times. The other turn of phrase he's going to use many times is that men found a yellow metal. Which
that's gold.
That's spoiler, that's gold, right?
That's gold.
So we are in the California, Yukon gold rush boom times, and this system, they need dogs. They need dogs to work. They need dogs to do things, to pull sleds. And so that drives a market, a black market of selling dogs. And so that's how Manuel is able to make a little bit of money.
Everything about it is really unfathomable to Buck. at first. We'll see he eventually gets used to it and he figures it out, but he has no idea what it's like to be thrown into this world where he was lounging in the grass with what he had. There was a pug and a Pekingese that he misses at some point. The other buddies on the farm.
He misses them.
He absolutely does. There is no doubt about it.
No doubt about it.
He misses them.
So, we are talking about Manuel, and he is stealing dogs. So he gets Buck and takes him up. There is a little bit of a discussion of exactly how much Manuel and the other guy get for Buck. Do you remember that, Mare?
I don't. How much do they get for him?
So Manuel steals Buck. He lures him away because Buck knows Manuel and trusts him. Jack London in writing this isn't completely explicit a lot of times. You have to sort of fill in the blanks with what he's talking about. So Manuel takes Buck, takes him to a saloon owner who then helps transport Buck further north. And the saloon owner apparently takes consignment of Buck, hires some hands, and then forwards Buck on forward to the dog breaker, the man in the red sweater, who we'll meet in a sec. But there's a conversation that Manuel has with the saloon owner as far as how much him and he mentions another guy get for this transportation for Buck. So they mention one guy got 50 and another guy got 100. So in 1897, $50, that calculates out to just over $1,500.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So if one of the guys is getting $1,500, the other guy's picking up 100, so we're looking at over $3,000. A little bit later on in the book, we will see how much Buck gets sold for, which is double that. So Buck gets sold eventually for $300. So we're talking about $6,000 we're paying for this sled dog.
And they thought that was a steal or present at that, he says, the man in the red sweater says.
Exactly.
So that just goes to show how lucrative this is.
How important it is.
Yeah.
So another little thing. So then Buck gets taken north, gets dropped off with this guy, the man in the red sweater, and he's the dog breaker. And this is where Buck first encounters a club. And you want to say anything about clubs, Mare?
Do you want me to cry right now? You want me to say anything about clubs? Me, who used to work at a humane society and train dogs for a living for a bit.
So you're saying you didn't wear a red sweater?
I didn't. I had a blue hoodie. Which, yeah, the Buck learns his lesson, unfortunately, and he never forgets the man in the red sweater. He never forgets a club either.
I was going to say the club imagery gets burned into his mind pretty quickly.
Yeah. They basically almost, I guess the breaker, so to speak, man in the red sweater, is good at his job because he beats Buck almost to death. Not bad enough that he can't recover, not bad enough that he dies, but...
Or becomes useless.
Right. But there is blood flowing from everywhere. His beautiful coat was sprayed and flecked with bloody slaver. And he hit him, he smacks him right in the face with a club. Right on the nose. And the guy knows what he's doing because Buck keeps coming at him. And we know Buck is a big dog. We know Buck is
140 pounds.
Yeah. He's
not
not...
my size.
I'm bigger than Buck at this point anyway. So I've got another person inside of me for a little bit longer. So I'm a bit bigger than Buck, but I still couldn't take a club. But Buck crumbled and went down, and he was knocked utterly senseless.
So I think this scene with the dog breaker illustrates two things that we're going to see from Buck throughout the rest of the book. Number one, Buck is stubborn. He's tough. He's stubborn. He's strong. He had the run of the judge's place. So when they're describing his life in the Santa Clara Valley, it describes Buck in imperious terms. He's the young prince who lords over the rest of the animals on the farm. He sees the house dogs, Isabel and Toots as beneath him, and then the hunting dogs that are down, just kept in kennels. Obviously they are not his equal either. And he has the run of the house, the run of the fields. He has the run of the family. He's the favored son of this plantation. So we're going to see Buck doesn't back down when the dog breaker comes at him. He doesn't cower. He takes a licking and he keeps on coming until the dog breaker finally does his thing. But the second thing that we see is Buck's also smart. When he's beat, he figures it out pretty quick, and figures out how to adapt under the dog breaker. I went to 2 different military colleges, and you see this very, very clearly. The guys who figure it out fast on how to navigate the system, and the guys who don't. And the ones that figure out are generally fairly successful in an environment like that.
Did you figure it out?
I definitely figured it out. I was quite successful in the system.
It's interesting. So I want to stick with that, but I want to point out there's a great paragraph that describes this on page 6 where Buck says, or the narrator says that Buck knew he was beaten, but he was not broken, and he knew he stood no chance against a man with a club. He learned that lesson. He never forgot it. And then London does a great job of comparing like what else could have happened. So he learned his lesson and he will endure being petted or being fed, but he is not going to now fawn over the man in the red sweater or any other man for that matter, as some dogs might, and be very appeasing and licking and almost like they love the person who's beaten them. But also, he's seen other dogs who do neither of those things and they are ultimately killed.
Sure.
So Buck straddles that middle ground, and I think that goes back to the point you're saying. He's really smart. So
exactly. There is, just in my own experience, seeing that in a military environment, that is kind of the 3 ways you go, right? You get the knuckleheads that don't want to bend, and they're the ones that are always getting in trouble. You get the kind of the bootlickers, the obsequious guys who attach themselves to, someone who's powerful, and then you got the guys that sort of straddle the line, who can play in the system, know the game, and can do it, but also aren't going to suck up, and they're going to stand on their own 2 feet. And that's really where Buck has come out on this end.
And that's the middle ground that you see in people, in your experience, who are the most successful. It's not like,
exactly,
in your words, a bootlicker gets to the top because they fawn over their superiors, because superiors, I'm going to go ahead and assume, are probably also the ones who are Buck-like in the middle ground, and they can spot that, or, they know what you're doing, and they're not going to, I'm assuming,
precisely
help you get forward.
And when those guys get put out on their own, they very quickly can't handle it. But as we will see, Buck can.
Yeah.
Something else. So the other kind of thing, so we'd mentioned that London doesn't like to explicitly say things. And so as you're reading this, you kind of have to piece together a little bit from context clues what's going on. So at the end of this first chapter, we meet Perot, and it's not immediately, so London does not explicitly say who Perot is. He does later. I think in chapter 2, he'll get into it a little bit. But in this first chapter, when we meet Perot, you have to pick up what's going on. So Perot sees Buck, sees his worth, pays the 300, or as we said earlier, $6,000 for Buck. And then this comment is made to Perot. So the guy he's buying the dog from says, "Well, it seems it's government money, and you ain't got no kick coming, eh, Perot?" Says Perot grinned. Said, "Considering the price of dogs had boomed skyward by the unwanted demand, it was not an unfair sum for so fine an animal. The Canadian government would be no loser, and nor would its dispatches travel the slower. So if you're not paying attention, that one sentence really tells you a lot about Perot, number one. Number two, tells you who he's working for. So he's using government money, Canadian government money specifically, to purchase this dog. So he's got no kick coming. So he's buying the dog on the up and up for the price stated. He's not getting any in his pocket off of this purchase. So I guess we could say Perot has some level of scruples at this point. At least he does work for the government, so that kind of lends him some credibility, I suppose. And then the last part of the sentence, nor would their dispatches travel the slower. So he is an official government courier. So if that was not clear from the first chapter, this is the kind of thing that London does. He just sort of sprinkles it in. You're like, oh, who's this guy Perot? Here's who he is.
And eventually we find out that Perot is really more or less delivering Buck and the animals they acquire later on, which we'll see towards the end of this reading, which we'll get to in just a second. Like, he's not going to stay with Perot. Perot's not his final owner for the rest of the book. Not his owner at all.
But he definitely does a lot of work for Perot.
Right.
Perot uses him for a while. Okay, so that kind of closes out chapter 1 and takes us into chapter 2.
It does, except I love the end of chapter 1. I love the end of chapter 1 that Buck's never seen snow before and everybody's laughing at him and he's snorting in the fluff. He's got a lot of lessons to learn.
I went to college in Pennsylvania, and we had a kid in our in my dorm who was from China and had never seen snow before. And so when the winter hit, he was blown away. So that's what I'm picturing when Buck is looking at it. Now, I'll always remember we were standing there one morning and they were talking about it, and he was asking some questions about snow or something. And then one of the upperclassmen said something about the ground freezing, and he just freaked out. He's like, the ground freezes! Like, it was... He had no concept of that.
Do you think it like glosses over like ice instantly, like in a cartoon, and now you're gonna all have to skate or something?
I don't know what he was picturing, but he definitely had never seen snow before, and didn't know the ground could freeze.
When did your kids first see snow? Because you've been in the South and you're in the Middle East. So when did your youngest first see snow? I
guess here. Really? We had a little bit of snow overseas.
You did in Jordan.
The first summer, the first winter we were there, it snowed twice. So they did play a little bit. We took them up. We had a flat roof on the top of the building. We took them up and they got to play and build a snowman.
No reaction? Do you remember?
No, they enjoyed it. They miss it. Here last year, 2 years ago, I can't remember. So we've been here 3 years now. We've had one... I wouldn't even call it a snow. Like, it flurried for a half hour. I mean, they played out in it, but yeah.
Well, you're down south.
If we're talking about snow, I remember after college. So, Meredith and I are from Pennsylvania, and I went to college in Pennsylvania and New York. But after college, I lived in Oklahoma. And we had a winter there, and it snowed one time and got a little bit of ice on the road, and it shut things down for, I think, 3 or 4 days. Everybody was freaking out. People were terrified to leave their homes. And then myself and the other Northerners, we were just like, we'd get like maybe a 2-hour delay one day from school for this, maybe. So it was like 3 or 4 free days off for the rest of us. We loved it, but...
Well, I miss snow too. There's been no snow. I don't know. There's snow once outside Philly this year. And we were waiting. Didn't even need to get shovels out. No salt, nothing. Oh, wow. There was nothing. And last year it snowed, I don't know, maybe once or twice. Anything significant. Good old climate change.
Well, we've traded snow for global pandemics.
Hooray!
All right, so on to chapter 2.
Chapter 2, the law of Club and Fang. And we mentioned this earlier, that Buck, because of his encounter with the man in the red sweater, he never forgets what happens because a man has a club. And he learns that quickly and continually and decides, I'm going to follow this law. It's the best route considering my my situation. But he learned some other lessons too, because he meets the other dogs. And
so yeah, he's learned the law of the club. Now he's going to learn the law of the fang.
There you go. And it's a nightmare, first of all. He's still in I think, like the shock phase of being stolen in the first place and getting used to this, and things keep changing. So he meets these other dogs.
Well, when Perot buys him, he buys him along with Curly from The Man in the Red Sweater at the end of chapter 1.
And Curly is the focus of this next lesson, because
Curly
Buck
doesn't last long.
No. Buck doesn't make the mistake this time. Buck makes few mistakes, and when he does, he learns quite quickly from them and stops making said mistake. But Curly does not. And Curly is a big dog too. And Buck has never seen, he says, dogs fight as these wolfish creatures fight. So here we have a good allusion to the wild that is calling, as is the title of the book. So Curly, he sees continue to fight with a husky dog the size of a full-grown wolf, though not half so large as she. So not half so large. I think she's bigger, right?
Yes, Curly is definitely the bigger of the dogs, but Curly is a dog from down south like Buck, because Curly came up with Buck.
And she's being friendly, of all things. She's making friendly advances towards this husky dog who straight up attacks her. And it's not just this husky dog who attacks her and doesn't want her to come make her friendly advances. It's everybody else. All the other dogs circling around and waiting. And Buck's like, well, what are they waiting for? And as soon as Curly went down, the other dogs leap upon her.
That was it.
Yeah. And we meet Spitz, who's laughing the whole time. He saw Spitz run out his scarlet tongue in a way he had of laughing. So, at least in this book, dogs laugh maliciously at the pain of others. And it took 2 minutes. And by the time the other dogs were clubbed off, they had mauled her to death. I've unfortunately seen not quite this bad. But, Kyle, you didn't live with us then, but Mom and Dad, the saints that they are, allowed a college friend to move in with us who brought her 3 dogs and 3 cats with her.
That's a lot of animals.
It was a lot of animals. It was 6 dogs in our house.
Oh, my
and
Lord.
4 cats, because I'd already had a cat. And then there were 2 Angora rabbits that showed up at some point, and a monitor lizard, and then 200 baby chicks at some point. Anyway.
I'm very glad I've left home by that point.
Anyway, the way the house is made, it was split level, so to speak, so she lived in a finished basement room. And there was you could close off both sides of the house. So it was all right in a way. Dogs all got along just fine till suddenly our husky dog, Mix, decided, and she and the boxer decided they hated each other. Just out of nowhere, living together for months.
Heeding the call of the wild.
Exactly. They couldn't even think that the other one was on the other side of the door. They would bust down doors. They would fight constantly. You had to keep them separated. And when that happens to one...
You gotta keep them separated.
When that happens with one dog, it trickles through the quote-unquote pack. And dogs will have... the term is slipping my mind, but it's kind of like an adjacent aggression. Like if you're close, they're not actually mad at you, but if you're close and they're that dialed up, you're gonna get bitten.
Yes, it's the bloodlust.
Yeah. So they did that to poor Titus one day. Titus is a dog that Kyle made us take home from Texas one year, who was...
I didn't think you were going to keep acquiring. Like it should have been like
well,
the one and then done.
Titus was less than a delight, unless you were Dad. But poor Titus had been ripped apart. Like his skin had been ripped apart and was black and necrotic and falling off, and we thought he was going to die. He didn't. We took care of him.
I mean, he did eventually, but
well, yeah, he's dead
later.
now. But not from that. But it was horrific. And these were dogs that loved each other, so to speak, and lived in the same house. So I'm just picturing these stranger dogs coming around, destroying Curly till they're all clubbed off. And what Buck learns, for one thing, is that it comes back to him in his sleep over and over, and it's quite troubling. But he really learns that he needs to see to it that he never goes down. If he's in a fight, he needs to win it. Or he needs to make sure he does something so that he doesn't go down, because everybody will be waiting for him. And there is no fair play. Once you're down, that's it. That's the end of it.
And this is definitely a good thing for Buck to learn, because he's going to see it again.
Of course.
So the thing I kind of dug about this chapter is this definitely had a, getting the crew together feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we pick up sort of the rest of the dog team through here. We get Joe and Billy and Solex and Dave. And so Perot and his partner Francois are getting the entire team together so they can actually start their couriering.
And Billy is a sweet boy who's appeasing and loving, and actually teaches Buck another lesson of how to sleep in the snow, because he loses everyone and he doesn't know where they are at night. And he tries to go into the tent because that's, I'm going to come sleep with the humans. And they start throwing shit at him and swearing and cursing him. And he can't find anyone. And if you don't know, sled dogs will dig a hole, bury themselves in it. And then that hole and their body heat kind of circulates around that space, and it keeps them warm despite the fact that they're buried in the snow. And so he accidentally steps on Billy, which is good that it was Billy. And he sees him under the snow, and Billy gives him a kiss on the nose, and it's very sweet. And Solex is the leader, right? No, Solex isn't
Spitz
the leader. Spitz is the leader. And
Spitz
Buck
is the leader.
Hates Spitz.
Solex, I think, is right in front of Buck. So Dave and Solex were Buck's trainers. So Dave is what they call the wheel dog. I guess he's the one right in front of the dog sled, and that's the one who controls who's going where. And he's the one who will nip Buck's heels to keep him in line and keep him pulling. And Solex, I think, runs right in front of Buck. So the two of them, when they first arrive, they're experienced sled dogs that Francois and Perot have picked up. So they train Buck, and Francois is very impressed. He tells Perot that he's got some good dogs and that Buck's learning fast.
Yeah, and
definitely Buck learning is definitely the theme of this chapter.
And Solex means the angry one, and you don't come up on Solex's blind side. He's got a bad eye or missing an eye, and he will slash you to the bone, which he did to Buck if you come up on his blind side. But they know what they're doing, as you mentioned, and they train Buck, so to speak. And Buck learns quite a few lessons. So he learns how to sleep. He learns how to run from the dogs. He learns what to do and what not to do in a fight. And
he learns how to eat.
Yeah, he learns how to steal and learns how to eat.
Learns how to steal and eat. So there's another illustration of Buck's shrewdness. So in the beginning, Buck's not eating fast enough, and the other dogs are stealing his food, and he's just not getting what he needs, till he figures out finally that he can steal, and he grabs some bacon, I think, from Perot, and ends up, he doesn't get punished for it when the other dogs does.
Yeah.
And Buck quickly learns, hey, it's pretty slick. If I can do it right and get away with it and not call attention to myself, I can get some extra food and avoid punishment.
He also learns that he can eat almost literally anything, and his body is so hungry, it's taking any kind of nutrient from whatever he's trying to consume. So they're that hungry while, they're being taken care of I guess, like the minimum.
Well, I think even Francois and Perot are at the minimum. They have, what we'll see in chapter 3, they have provisions with them, but obviously that has to last them however long the journey they're going. And so not only do they have to keep, so even though they're being kept at the minimum, the men all do understand the dogs are their life.
Yeah.
So when they make camp, the dogs eat first, the dogs are tended to, their feet are tended to first, and then once all that is done, then Francois and Perot take care of themselves and will eat and make camp.
So these first two chapters, we've seen Buck's previous life. We've seen him learn quickly. we've gotten the examples of the lessons that he's learned that are going to serve him for the future. And London does this all very quickly. In these first very short chapters, we get a really good setup. But what thing I want to point out about what London does at the end of chapters is I think he really sticks the landing, in that if there is a point to the chapter or a thought-provoking element that he wants to point out, it's usually there at the end of the chapter. And at the end of chapter 2, I think he sets up an interesting discussion or argument, because he says in reference to Buck, his development, and then parenthetically, or retrogression, was rapid. So is Buck being called to the wild, is learning these previous ways of whatever ancestors he's got, is that a retrogression, or is he developing into something more?
He's definitely pulling out some ancient instincts that were long buried in his species. But he's also merging it with his shrewdness from life among humans, because he is working with humans at this point. So he can't be completely wild, or else he would probably be killed.
Mm-hmm.
But he also can't be that soft southern dog that loves humans. So he's treading that middle ground. He's blending the two.
So there's that element of balance again. I think that happens to people. I mean, while we're recording this, we're in a global pandemic. And I don't know if we revert to old ways, but if you've seen the videos of people punching each other over packs of toilet paper, there is a regression of sorts, a retrogression, when they think survival of if you have to survive, what are you going to do to survive? Are you going to, blend the two of whatever shrewdness you might have? Or are you going to fight and
descend into madness and anarchy?
Yeah. Or lay down and just give up, or be so appeasing that people take you for somebody who's weak, as they did with Curly, is with her friendly advances, or
right.
I worry about Billy sometimes. He's too friendly.
So we end chapter 2 with Buck learning how to steal. And so that idea of theft, is going to be our inciting incident here come chapter 3, and it's going to continue. So this scarcity of resources and this fight for survival. So all the other dogs, so Buck's the new kid, all the other dogs are stealing from him until he kind of figures it out. But Spitz, the leader, who Buck does not like, and it's the lead dog's job to keep everyone in line. So we learn through reading this that the lead dog has to roust the other dogs from their nests in the morning, has to get them lined up to be harnessed, and if they don't want to pull, it's the lead dog's responsibility to kind of punish them and make sure they are pulling. So Spitz has been stealing from Buck, and Buck doesn't like it, and so he finally responds. So he finally snaps back at Spitz, but before he can get final resolution, they get invaded. So nearby to where Francois and Perrault had camped for the night, there's an Indian village, and they apparently have dozens upon dozens of starving huskies hanging around the village, and they smell the food that our dog sled team has, and so they attack. So after this attack, what Buck has done by responding to Spitz, so Buck is now openly challenging Spitz for leadership. He hasn't quite gone there yet, but the other dogs definitely feel the tension, and Perrault and Francois also feel the tension. The dogs in the past had been pulling as a consolidated unit, so they were pulling as one. Now the dogs are all pulling separately. They're not in unison. Some of the other dogs are starting to show some insubordination to Spitz's leadership. So Buck is kind of stirring things up. And Francois and Perrault notice this. They don't really take any action, though, which I found interesting. Even though it's making them less efficient on their run here, they seem content to let this play out, to kind of let Buck and Spitz figure it out. as far as who's going to vie for leadership here.
When they have, and it comes up multiple times what they call Buck. They call him two devils. At least Francois does, because Perrault says, "One devil that spits," and Francois returns, "That Buck two devils." And they know, they say someday, in our excellent French accents, which we apologize to any French Canadians out there, but he said,
we're real sorry,
some damn day him kill that Buck. So they know. They do know,
Right.
and I think it's an interesting point that they don't. What are they going to do? What are their options? To put Buck at a different spot in the harness, to have him pull on a different, like they're stuck with them.
They are, because Buck is definitely going to challenge Spitz, and as long as they're content with the way Spitz runs the team, I don't think, other than killing one of the dogs, they really don't have a choice at this point. So they're going to let it play out. They
have to make it to their final destination, and they're carrying mail, aren't they?
I don't know what they're carrying at this point. So it does mention sometimes they're carrying firewood and lumber, which is a heavier load and stresses and strains the dogs more. And sometimes they're carrying mail, which is light, and the dogs enjoy that and can make better time. So I think they carry various cargoes. So we've had this attack. We mentioned the attack from the starving huskies. So there was a large chase before they finally were able to break contact with them. But they're kind of out of food. A lot of the huskies got into the grub box of provisions that Francois and Perrault had. So now the dogs are hungry. They're tired out from this chase that they had. And suddenly a rabbit bursts out. And Buck can't take it. This is sort of the first moment of his full instinctual emergence, and he takes off. He can see the rabbit, and he can smell and envision the rabbit's blood on his jaws and how good that's going to taste, and he goes. And when he goes, the rest of the dogs go too.
And it's not just, the description of him chasing the rabbit and him thinking about what it's going to be like to kill this meat fresh of his own accord and eat it. London tells us, as Buck's thoughts, there is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life and beyond which life cannot rise. And such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes when one is most alive, and it comes to a complete forgetfulness that one is alive. And Buck is leading the pack, crying, chasing the rabbits and what he said, swiftly before him through the moonlight. And so this desire to kill this rabbit, there's nothing better than chasing this rabbit. It is the full summit of life. He can't peak. He's peaked. Buck has peaked in this rabbit chase, right?
That's because Buck's never seen Netflix. But yeah, so Buck is going after this rabbit, and the other dogs are going with him. Except Buck does not have a monopoly on shrewdness. So Spitz is able to tame his instinctual nature and use his cunning. So Spitz breaks away from the pack and circles around and catches Buck unawares.
Yeah, but this is Spitz's mistake.
This was the confrontation that Buck wanted, and I think Spitz knew it had to happen. I think Spitz probably wanted it too. Spitz was probably a little arrogant. He's been the leader for a while on this, running lead dog. But yeah, the end result, the fight does not go well for Spitz.
I think you're right. Spitz knew it had to happen. It had to be the boss battle. There had to be the finality of one of these fights, but he picked a terrible time. Buck is in the ecstasy of life right now. Life doesn't get any better with a thought of killing on his mind. It's just a rabbit at this point. But that's when Spitz takes the moment to jump out and say, "Hey, let's fight." When Buck is dialed up to this point where he feels amazing and he wants to kill something. He wants to kill a rabbit and eat it, but here's Spitz even better. I wonder if he peaked even even higher, seeing that he's got this chance.
He's got the fight. Well, I think Spitz he underestimated Buck, certainly, but I don't think Spitz realized that Buck has had this transformation that we've been riding along with. I think Spitz is still evaluating Buck as the soft Southland dog, and so he's going after the rabbit. Spitz thinks, oh, this guy is in over his head. I'm gonna pull a fast one and take advantage of this and get this usurper out of here. But what Spitz doesn't know is that Buck's instinctual nature, the call of the wild, has taken over Buck, and Buck's got it, and he takes him out.
But again, back to your point of the blending of the two and Buck's intelligence. Spitz is a practice fighter, it says, and he's done this before. And it says, well, actually, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong about that. Spitz is a practice fighter, and it says bitter rage was his, but never blind rage. So he's smart too. He said in passion to rend and destroy, he never forgot his enemy was in like passion to rend and destroy. He never rushed till he was prepared to receive a rush, never attacked till he had first defended that attack. So Spitz seems to be winning at first because he has this... He doesn't... I may just made the point that maybe he doesn't know what he's gotten himself into, but I think more to your point, he doesn't really know who Buck is the way we do. He knows what he's gotten himself into with the quote-unquote common enemy that he's seen before, but that's not who Buck is at this point.
Right. As we've been pointing out, Buck has that adaptability and that smarts, and he learns. He's a fast learner. So even through the course of this fight, Buck very quickly learns what's working and what doesn't work, and he eventually gets Spitz basically on a feint. Spitz thinks he's going to do the same thing again. Buck zigs when Spitz thinks he's going to zag, and that's Spitz's undoing.
London calls it Buck's imagination, which I think we don't think of dogs as having imaginations. I don't know. Maybe dog lovers do, but I don't think in the general population you think, oh, my dog is so imaginative. But he possessed a quality that made for greatness, imagination. I feel like that's like the more you know. For greatness, you need imagination. Like he used both, the instinct, but he could fight by his head as well. And so, as you said, Buck wins this one, and that's it.
So thus ends both Spitz and the third chapter. But things aren't all that terrific, starting with chapter 4. So Buck's taken over, or wants to take over. But at first, Francois and Perrault, they're not putting Buck up front.
No, Solex is next in line. He's more seasoned. He knows what he's doing. They trust him. I think the interesting thing is Solex could really care less. He's like, yeah, put me up here, put me in the back, whatever. But Buck is not having it. Buck believes he has earned the right to lead. He's got the desire to lead. He has the instinct to lead. And he's not backing down at all. Even though, they hook Solex up to the front. Buck keeps attacking Solex, not out of like, I hate you, Solex, but basically like, you're in my spot, dude.
Right.
You got to get out. And they get the club out and everything. They chase Buck. And he's not coming. He's not going to do it. And Francois and Perrault, tired out, they've lost a lot of time. They finally say, oh, forget it. Let's just put him up front and see how he does. And Dave and Solex are like, all right, not my business. My business is to work. And they have a really strong desire to work, just as Buck has a really strong desire to lead.
Except that once he gets that lead job, still things don't go well.
They go okay. What do you mean they don't go well?
Well, the dogs aren't pulling as a team. Buck doesn't know how to lead yet.
I think
he learns quickly, as Buck does. But in the first, when he gets put into the harness, the dogs still aren't pulling as one.
They get there, though. They get there pretty quickly.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
Am I wrong on that? Do we have to cut that out?
I think you're pretty wrong on that, dude.
All right. Take out my wrongness.
I don't know. Maybe we should leave it. I like leaving in your wrongness.
I will then take out my clap. Oh, okay. We need to edit. This is the part where we do the minor edits.
I want to leave that in too.
I'm done. All right, I'm gonna shut up. You keep going.
All right. So so here's the unintimidating part of this is that we're talking through this just as readers, and readers, guess what? Sometimes you forget what happened.
Exactly. Wrestle with these books. I was the bad student in high school. I didn't take enough notes. So next time I'll take more notes.
So let's find out. The team had grown unruly in the last days of Spitz, and their surprise was great now that Buck proceeded to lick them into shape. Pike, who pulled at Buck's heels, who never put an ounce more of his weight against the breastband,
you're right. Yeah,
he was compelled to do, was swiftly, repeatedly shaken.
So there you go, listeners. I was wrong. The general tone of the team picked up immediately. It recovered its old-time solidarity. And once more, the dogs leapt as one dog in the traces. Okay, Buck's awesome. I forgot.
Yeah, Buck is a shit. He did it right. And he does a really good job in the lead role. But, so we've got Buck. So what I think is the most interesting thing, well, two of the most interesting things about this chapter is that they work. And Buck is a good leader. He gets everyone into shape. And his desire to be the leader is the main thing. Like Solex probably could have done it, right? But he didn't have the desire to do it.
Okay, so at this point, now, this is a piece that I don't understand, where they say, now comes official orders. So Francois and Perrault, who work for the Canadian government, they receive some other kind of orders, and the dogs are turned over.
And they have to leave. The dogs have a new job.
They
Francois and Perrault have a new job. What that is, we don't know. Perhaps repeating the same job they just had and getting more dogs.
Getting another team up, perhaps.
But they get into town, they get official orders, and somebody new takes them on, and Francois and Perrault pass out of Buck's life, and he never sees them again. So if you thought we were going to spend this whole book with Francois and Perrault, you're wrong. Because
my rubbish French-Canadian accent. Thanks you, Mr. Lungden.
Now you get to do what's called a Scotch half-breed, which might be problematic.
That might be problematic.
Yeah. But that is what this human is called in this book. And Francois, their parting is sweet. He hugs Buck around the neck and wept over him. I didn't take Francois for a weeper.
Well, like he said, that dog's worth $1,000, which nowadays is over 31 grand.
Maybe there's a reason to weep. and he's gone. And then they start to do this job of mail couriering. Day in, day out, a monotonous life, operating with machine-like regularity. Every day is like the next. Hey, sounds like pandemic lockdown life.
It kind of does. Buck should start a podcast.
So they do the same thing every single day, and this is their life. And during this life, it's Dave who starts to suffer. Dave is ill, or he's not hurt because they look him over. He doesn't have any physical or visible physical ailment. Internally, though, he's in a lot of pain. So what we see here, as we saw earlier on with Buck's desire to lead and get that at any cost, and beating up Solex, keeping the team back and not getting in line. His desire to lead was so strong. Dave's desire just to simply work is so strong that he's willing to suffer through it. They take him out. They replace him. He refuses to take the easy way out, so to speak, by running behind the sled where they've, the sled's going first. So the snow is packed. It's easier to run there. No, he runs beside his usual spot in line through all of the snow. He's tenacious about it. And they finally put him back and they say, fine, die in your harness if that's what you really want. And it is. That's what he wanted. He pleaded with his eyes to remain there. The driver was perplexed. And it says, they talked of how a dog could break its heart through being denied the work that killed it. And they've known dogs who do this before, that the work will kill him, but not working would kill him or break his heart to the point of death anyway. So they let him do it to the point where he can't anymore, and they take him out, and then they have to shoot him. And then they're on their way.
And they're not as broken up over it, I think,
Not
as
nearly.
Francois was over parting with Buck.
No. They're not.
But yeah. So do you think Dave died just from he was worn out, just overworked? Just cumulative fatigue got to him?
No. I don't know. I don't know how old Dave is, but he's worked hard and he's not young. It's not like he's a yearling.
He was an experienced sled dog by the time we meet him.
Yeah. And I mean, we've had enough dogs. I mean, we had a lot more dogs after you moved out. A lot.
Very true.
But sometimes there looks like there's nothing wrong with them, but you hear them cry when they lay down, or you notice one day, like we had a great dog named Maybelline, who just suddenly one day she just wouldn't get up out of nowhere. Day before she was fine. Next day won't get up. Vet says she's got a tumor that grew just to the point where it was touching something on her spine and she could no longer move. It just took that 24-hour period to get to the point where it crippled her. So, I don't know, Dave could have something growing inside of him that is, he could have arthritis, he could have cancer, he could have anything.
Well, these are big dogs, and most dogs
that long.
over 50 pounds develop arthritis, which is why they need a good supportive bed. So if you're in Philadelphia, if Big Barker wants to sponsor us.
Is that a literal place? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, it's a Philadelphia dog company, a dog bed company. They make
Why do you know that?
cushion dog beds. They sponsor another pod I listen to.
Oh.
All right, so, yeah.
You don't have a dog.
I do not. This is true. We do not have a dog.
We should keep the conversation going here because my interest has been really piqued at some of the things that we've talked about. Namely, the desire to work or the desire to lead at your own peril. Do people do that? I think so. And for what? Just to make money or just to find purpose or fulfillment? Like, is that what Dave is doing? Is he fulfilling a purpose? Because he's not making any money. What's he getting out of it? Why not just run off and chase rabbits and live on your own? Be quote unquote free. So that's something I'm interested in. I'm also interested in, we didn't talk about it in our discussion here, but again, the ends of chapters that London's hitting us with. At the end of chapter 2, or is it the end of chapter I think it's the end of chapter 4, where he's sitting by the fire and he's pretty much, oh no, it's the middle. It's not the end of chapter 4, it's the middle. But he's looking through the fire and he's basically like half dreaming, half envisioning the past and cavemen, literally. He's seeing cavemen and he's seeing just the fire of the past. And they wake him up and Ed, I want to go back. Here's where it says he misses the dogs on his farm, Kyle. Just so you know. Okay. Anyway, I was thinking about the thing that I want to hear from people is this idea of hearkening back to the past as he's looking and dreaming through the fire. It made me think of, not that I expect you to know this, but Sharon Olds has a great poem called Summer Solstice,
I definitely don't know it.
New York City, where at the end of that poem, she talks about the fires that we lit at the beginning of the world and how we are connected in that way.
She's wrong because we didn't start the fire. It's been always burning since the world's been turning.
Okay, we have to end it now.
All right. Well, we will continue the discussion. Join us on our Facebook page, Classics You Slept Through. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CYSTPod. You can send us your thoughts via email, cystpod@gmail.com. So for next time, let's finish the book. This is the last 3 chapters of The Call of the Wild. The read-alouds will be in your feed tomorrow, Wednesday, and we'll see you next week. This has been Classics You Slept Through. So wake up. You are late for 4th period algebra.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.